Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. Welcome to our deliberative forum on religion in public life, both to our friends in person and our many friends online as well. My name is Graham Bullock. I'm a political science professor here at Davidson College and also the faculty director of the Deliberative Citizenship Initiative, which has been running about 5 years. And it is designed to create opportunities, just like this one, for Davidson students, faculty, staff, community members, and alumni to engage with each other on difficult but important topics facing both our community and our broader society, like the issue of religion in public life. And I want to thank some of our co-hosts tonight. The chaplain's office here at Davidson, the religious studies department, and the political science department are all co-sponsoring tonight's event. So I'm really grateful for their support. This is the 15th deliberative forum that the DCI has hosted since 2020. And it's the 5th that we've held in person, both with people live here in the Lilly Gallery, as well as online. And we really appreciate the opportunity to be able to provide this opportunity to people here in Davidson, as well as people all over the country and indeed all over the world. So before we get started, I want to ask you all to complete a little survey, a pre-event survey. Our in-person friends, you can find it on your table. There's a QR code, and it's the green side, pre-event survey. You can scan it with your phone, take a picture of it, and then it's a short little survey. We'll do another one at the end, the post-event survey. And online, it should be posted in the chat, a link to the survey, so please complete that survey. This is part of our research in investigating how we can make these events work well and work better in the future. So thank you so much for participating in that survey. And you have an opportunity to enter your name in a lottery for a $50 gift certificate if you complete either of the surveys. So today's topic: what role should religion play in the public sphere and government policies? Thought I'd take a moment to explain why are we investigating this topic. So we go through a process every year. We recruit ideas from people within the DCI community to give us suggestions. And this was one of the most, and then we do a survey. We ask, okay, of these, what is the most popular? And this was one of the most popular topics in our poll last year. And it's a little different from our previous topics. Often we do specific policies, but this is a little sort of deeper, a little broader set of issues, but no less important. And all of our topics, all of our questions focus on issues, questions that well-meaning and well-intentioned people can and often do disagree on, and sometimes disagree deeply on. And so this is why we create a space for listening and for sharing and for coming up perhaps with new ideas that we hadn't thought of before tonight. To do this, to help us with this, we have a fantastic panel of experts, of people with different perspectives and different backgrounds that can help us guide us in this conversation, first through talking with each other, and then you all in the second hour will have a chance to talk among yourselves about this issue, about these questions, building on the deliberation guide that's on the table in front of you and also available online and in your emails, one of the many emails that I sent you over the last several weeks. And the one thing is tonight, as you know, the event is free of charge. The one thing we ask is that you stay for the second half, the second hour. Don't just, maybe if you can, not just leave after the panelists, but stay and actually engage with your fellow citizens on this important set of topics. And we have about 25 trained facilitators, DCI fellows, Davidson students who have gone through a rigorous training to facilitate your conversations. And I'd like to, our in-person facilitators, if you could all stand up and wave your hand so we know who you are. And you'll be meeting them later. And then online, if our online facilitators want to, wave their hands, or I don't know if they can actually see you, but wave your hands or do some fun thing with Zoom. That'd be cool. And then I also want to highlight the deliberation guide I mentioned. We had several students write this guide, and I think they're in the room. So May, is May here? May might have gone to her online room. LJ, there's LJ in the back, and Stephen. Where is Stephen in the room? No, Stephen might be in his room. So LJ, Stephen, and May all are senior fellows, and they helped write the guide to provide some background and a kind of foundation for your conversation today. I also want to thank Adam Barton and Ryan Clark in the back. They are the sort of our technical wizards that make all this happen, the Zoom component, all of the sound. So I appreciate their seamless operation. So if we can give them a round of applause as well. And I also obviously want to highlight our panelists tonight. But in the interest of time, we're not going to do sort of extensive introductions. We have their bios. You've seen them already in the materials we've sent out. They'll introduce themselves as they start the conversation, just so I can shut up and let them start talking. But I do want to introduce Professor Jason Blum, who is our moderator tonight. Jason is a good friend and also professor of practice in the writing program here at Davidson. And he actually has taught a course on this topic, religion in the public sphere, and is working on a book about it. So couldn't ask for anyone more qualified to be our moderator tonight. So thank you, Jason, for guiding this conversation. And thank you to our panelists for being here to provide a foundation for more deep and authentic conversations. So with that, let's welcome our panelists and let them get started.
So this first question, I'm going to ask all five of you to weigh in on, just to kind of get the ball rolling. Very sort of general in scope. What role should religion play in public life in America? And then somewhat more specifically, how can we distinguish between, on the one hand, religion's role in the public square, i.e. in sort of unofficial contexts, and then on the other hand, religion's role in government, say in official contexts or with regard to public policy? And whoever wants to jump in first is welcome to do so.
I can start the ball rolling. So I am Nancy Petty. I'm the pastor of Pullen Memorial Baptist Church in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I've been for the last 33 years. And for about the last 20 years of my ministry, I have focused on interfaith dialogue and partnering with others in the community, particularly Bishop William Barber and the Moral Monday movement in North Carolina, being a faith leader in the public square. And so I think from my perspective, I'll be real brief. I think the role religion should play in public life is it has this great potential to shape, when used for inclusivity and love, to shape moral and ethical citizens, to participate in the life of the community in making policies and guiding the community toward the common good. And I think where it interfaces or intersects with governing policies, I think that has to do with whatever role is religion playing, it must always seek to speak to the common good that our Constitution and our governing constitutions of our different states and our documents point to, which is to protect all of our citizens.
I guess I'll just add to that. I'm Hadi Mubarak. I'm an associate professor of religion at Queen's University of Charlotte, the sister school of Davidson. I would say that religion will inevitably play a role in public life in the sense that, as a professor of religion, what religions ultimately all have in common is that they try to answer questions of significance to their practitioners, right? Like, what is ultimate reality? What is my purpose in this world? What happens to me after I die, right? And I found that all of the world religions try in different ways to answer these existential questions. And considering the significance of religion to people's lives, I think it would be naive for us to expect religion to not play a role in public life, because for those who take their religion seriously, it will guide the kind of choices they make wherever they are, right? The choices they make. However, I would say that when it comes to public policy, we do have to be really, really careful. And there is one thing I want to also add to that, which is that even when we think things are religiously neutral, that culture is like, so culture is the medium through which religion is expressed, and our American culture does privilege, even when we think it's neutral, the dominant religious identities of this country. So if we think about when our holidays are, right, that, Christian children don't have to ask for leave for Christmas or for Easter most of the time, or, our weekends begin at the start of the Sabbath, right, that on Friday night. So I just want to bring to attention that even when we think the public sphere is religiously neutral, I think, as a Muslim American, that it does privilege the dominant religious identities. And so therefore, there might be a need to kind of strive for more inclusivity.
I'm Bill McKenneth, pastor of Reeves Temple AME Zion Church. Yes, I think that religion does have a specific role to play in the public square. My church, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, was founded in response to discriminatory practices. And ever since our founding, we have been in the public square because our interest is the pursuit of justice. And of course, if we come to the public square with justice in mind, perhaps we will be sensitive to how others might experience marginalization. So yes, religion in the public square. But we do need to be careful because by and large, religion has taken an inclusivistic posture. I got it right, you got it wrong. I'm the only way, your way doesn't work, that type of thing. So we do have to be careful. And therefore, we should perhaps have some guidelines as to how we present religion in the public square. As far as government, I see public squares including government. I don't know if I need to separate the two. So religion should function in both. The real onus is on the government and what role they can play, not so much on individual practitioners, because we do have our constitutional rights to freedom of expression and so forth. Yeah.
Sure. I'm Bob Destro. I am a law professor at Catholic University in Washington, and I'm a litigator. I basically write and litigate First Amendment cases, have done so for a long time. And, my first reaction to the question is, and this is, lawyers get picky like this, but it's like, you're asking the wrong question. And the reason that I say it that way is that religion is kind of too abstract. What we're talking about is people in the public square. Okay, we're talking about our fellow citizens, our brothers and sisters. And so the question is, what role should religious people play in the public square? Or more appropriately, if I were to ask the question the way it's phrased in the program, what role do secular people have in the public square? You'd see kind of the underlying assumption of the question. And so the question of, I don't think there's a religious tradition anywhere in the world that doesn't buy into some aspect of treat your neighbor, love God, and love your neighbor. And so the question, when we say we have to be careful, it's like, yeah, my neighbor is a member of the community too. And I think that we'll get into this a little bit later, but when you say policy, we live in a democratic republic. And so we're going to win some, we're going to lose some. We got trying to get people to understand that there are kind of implicit assumptions like when does the Sabbath start? You know, that's the neighborhood. You know, if I lived in Egypt, it would start on Thursday night. You know, so I mean, it's a, you know, so this question to me, it's all about putting the human part in human rights.
Hi there. My name is Brian Silva, and I'm with Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Thank you to the Wildcats for having us here. Hello to everybody at home. And I think that it's a really interesting and important question because there are secular and religious people in public life because everybody in public life comes into the public square with a belief system. Some of that's based on religion, some of that is based on no faith at all. One of the things that I think is important, strangely, for an organization that was founded 80 years ago by Protestant pastors to protect the ability of all people to practice their faith. You know, we live in a country now where 20 to 25%, the most recent polls identify as non-religious, whether that be atheist, agnostic, or humanist. But everybody's in the public square with a belief system. That's what guides their daily lives. The question to me is that when those belief system in an organized fashion, you know, sometimes it's religion, sometimes it's others, attempt to impose that belief system through policy on everyone to have to live under. And I've worked and lived in countries where that is the norm. But I'm joyful every day that we live in a place where all of us sitting around the table of these different belief systems do have the opportunity to speak and to share. And I think that's something, you know, that's worth protecting. And so that's why I think it's joyful to have all of these belief systems and ideas in the public square. But when it comes to policy, a very simple guideline we think of is when we come together to talk about policy, no matter what your inspiration is for coming to the conversation, does the end result do no harm?
That's right.
That's the big question that I think we always have to ask.
Common good.
Thank you all for that. So my next question drills down just a little bit more deeply into some of the issues that I think you've all already touched on. And that is, does religion deserve special legal status? And if so, why? Currently in the US, religious individuals and communities enjoy a number of legal privileges, commonly known as accommodations, which allow religious persons, communities, and institutions to engage in practices that at least sometimes would be considered illegal. For example, there's the ministerial exception, which basically exempts religious institutions from non-discrimination laws that apply to employment. There are also, for example, vaccine exemptions. In 30 states plus Washington, D.C. right now, individuals can obtain exemptions from vaccine mandates for religious reasons. In 13 states, people can obtain the same kind of exemption for personal or religious reasons. So there's this history and this tradition of accommodations for religion in the U.S. Is that justified? And if so, how?
That's a very interesting dynamic that you present here. Because of these exemptions, perhaps they are justifiable based on some of the privileges or benefits that religious institutions are afforded. And the idea of separation of church and state would come into play as well. I think there's a deal that has been made whereby religious institutions have every opportunity to have, let's say, tax advantages. And because of those tax advantages, they may be hindered from doing certain things, but yet may be applauded for advocating other programs or other issues. So, you know, the whole idea of accommodations, that might be a suspect.
That's where I would probably disagree with you. And the reason I would is that most of these discussions, just like the discussion guide does, start with the First Amendment. Yeah, but that's not really where you should start. You should start with the original Constitution, which is shot full of, they're not explicit, one's explicit, is accommodations. Okay, so if you think about the idea of e pluribus unum, you know, the colonies were pretty religiously diverse. Pennsylvania was probably the most diverse, but they were brutal in their exclusion of Quakers, and, the Methodists found out the hard way in Virginia what happens when you challenge the Anglican power structure. So we all learn that history. But the Constitution itself, Article 6, says no religious test will ever be imposed for an office or public trust under the United States. Okay, but that only applies to really judges and executive branch appointees and contractors. I mean, that's kind of the next frontier in that litigation, but the rest of it's completely implicit. The qualifications for president don't have any religious things in them. The qualifications for Congress don't have anything religious. The qualifications for electors have nothing about religious. That was all left out. But the one that is the pivot was, can you swear or affirm? Because if you can't swear, you can't be a juror. You can't be so it was the original Constitution was built around accommodations. They're not obvious, but they're there because the whole point was to bring people together. So the whole idea of an accommodation is, how do we lift a burden that you may think is justified, but I can't live with, and so the obvious one is I swear or affirm.
What he said.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, as a member of a religious minority, I think accommodations are critical, right? Because the way I view accommodations is that it's usually an exception to a rule, right? So where DMV, for example, required, a person's head not to be covered for a long time, and it was state by state specific. And one of my first internships, I was helping a civil rights organization in DC when I was there as a graduate student at Georgetown University in 2003 when I first started my MA. And they said, we want you to basically compile the state by state DMV policies on religious exemptions, right? Like who. And I remember just, in high school, right, playing soccer. I mean, something as minor as like, can you get an exemption for what you are required to wear or not wear, being part of the athletic team, right? And so being on the margins of American culture, where whether or not we recognize it, American culture does privilege the dominant Christian groups, right? Or the dominant, I should say, religious groups, in the sense that, our calendar, right? Our calendar is the Gregorian calendar. It's based on the Western Christian calendar, right? I, as a Muslim, I have to keep track of the Islamic calendar. Ramadan is starting in about 15 days, right? I got to keep track. What year is it in the Muslim calendar? I always forget. I got to double check, right? So I just want us to remember that even when, and it reminds me of this whole guise of objectivity, we say like things are neutral. Are they really neutral? Maybe they seem neutral. And so upholding the status quo in the name of neutrality can sometimes disenfranchise those who are on the margins.
I do want to add something real quick, in the sense of, as a faith leader, when I step out into the public square as a religious person, one of my core values is equity, not equality, but equity, because equity, whereas equality means sameness, everything's alike. Equity means people get what they need. And I think in some sense, this applies to that, in terms of back to this no harm, common good. If an accommodation needs to be made for equity to take place, then I think, yes. I mean, we should be a society that can be flexible enough to determine what's in the best interest of human beings, to live their lives and have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
And I think, with accommodations, the approach I kind of look at is, can we do things without accommodations? Like, is there a reason why anybody that wanted to cover their head couldn't do that instead of carving out for one? Because the problem with with too many accommodations is then we start to say like, well, is it a reasonable accommodation? And then we get back to your question of, well, who's asking that question? What the dominant culture says that this isn't, but somebody from a minority culture says, well, this isn't. But if you don't understand that culture, it looks like it is. And oftentimes religious and other minorities have been disenfranchised because their accommodation has been deemed an undue burden. Whereas in the dominant culture, it has. So I think for equity purposes, especially when we can accommodate people just in general, instead of having to say it's like simply because of their religion or simply because of another issue. Because the other thing is when you start to build in too many accommodations, it really becomes a very slippery slope. It's not a big leap, and we are living it today where, folks are able to opt out of non-discrimination laws and other things that are designed to protect religious minorities and LGBTQ people and women, and be able to challenge it in the sense, well, that's my sincerely held religious belief.
Thank you for that, Brian. That actually, that's a fantastic bridge to my next question, actually. When I was putting the questions together for this forum, I couldn't help but reference law professor Stephen Carter at least once. He's one of my favorite thinkers. Yeah, right. It's one of my favorite thinkers when it comes to religion in the public square. And in his book, The Culture of Disbelief, he, and I applaud him for this, he wants to defend the place of religion in the public square. But he admits very candidly that at least sometimes the principle of what he called equality, I think today we would use the term anti-discrimination. Anti-discrimination and religious autonomy or religious liberty will sometimes come into conflict with each other. Those two things, it's inevitable that they will come into conflict sometimes. And we have seen examples of that recently, right? I mean, we could think of a number of Supreme Court cases. Many of you have probably heard of the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, the baker who didn't want to make a cake for a same-sex couple for their wedding. 303 Creative, this was the website designer who didn't want to design websites for same-sex couples' weddings. So these are examples of that conflict between anti-discrimination and religious liberty or religious autonomy. So the question I'm going to put to you is, what should society do when those two things come into conflict? The way Carter puts it, we have to come down on one side or the other. So which side do we come down on?
It seems to me that the religious community is asked more, they ask more of the religious community than they would the secular committee. By and large, one thing with religious institutions in the public square is not only are we allowed to perhaps mention our convictions, but then we have to make sure that we justify it through some other secular means, which is unfair to the religious community because you're not asking the same thing of the secular community. So if there's a norm or standard, it's the secular community that has the extreme advantage. Because then the religious community has to devise a way of figuring how does this fit into the scheme of the secular perspective.
And if I can add something to that, I mean, one thing, Supreme Court has been all over the map on this, and the one of the classes that I teach, we talk about characterization. It's like what you call stuff. And so when you say, well, what does religion mean? The court bent itself into a pretzel saying that, religion is any kind of ultimate belief about the cosmic nature of things. I mean, I'm being, using literary license here, but it's basically that motive force in you, that Heide was describing. But they have never, ever defined secular. So that we have no idea what that means. And so it kind of means not religious, right? And so it's kind of like a circular definition. So your point about we impose more, the other thing that I think everybody needs to understand is that the Constitution doesn't speak in terms of either equity or equality. It says equal protection. And that protection piece It's like, how do we protect people with different points of view on really fundamental questions like same-sex marriage, for example? You know, do you just say, okay, we've got what we call a true conflict, in which case somebody's got to give, and then we resolve that through democratic processes, or what do we do? I mean, that's a tough question.
Yes, I'm thinking that everyone has a worldview. And so the religious and the non-religious, they have worldviews. And they pretty much stick to those worldviews as much as anyone else. That's how they navigate through the world. So these worldviews would suggest to me that they have to be held accountable as much as you would ask the religious community to be held accountable. I think it's only a fairness there. Or you can just allow for the secularist view to be your default without ever having to explain, your particular worldview and how it stacks up against other people's faiths and understanding of how the world operates. So to ask the religious community to justify their influence by virtue of some secular concept, philosophical, legal, sociological, whatever, is an unfair requirement in order to be dropped. That's not to say that the religious community can just say whatever it wants to say and get away with it, because you can't allow that as well. The one.
That's what happens. That's the reality
Yeah.
in our country
Yeah.
right now.
But we would want to make sure that in our civil discourse that we have a high degree of respect for one another, and respect is one of those kind of things that we have these dialogues with in mind. Respect. It would seem that that would allow for me to be able to shut up and listen for just a little while. I'm sorry, you may go on. It can also be framed with respect to what we're aiming to do. And our dialogue is aiming to be inclusive, fair, just. If we have those kind of parameters in mind, we just might be able to have honest dialogue, sure.
I would say in terms of the tensions that you brought to our, the tensions that arise in terms of what side you land on, religious accommodation or people's religious freedom or anti-discrimination. I would land on the side of anti-discrimination being prioritized in the absence of clear-cut or definitive religious, what should I say? So within religious communities, there's a lot of diversity, and they're not homogenous communities. Whatever religious community we're talking about, whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Islam, or even Hinduism, Jainism, right? So in the absence of a unified religious authority that can definitively say, yes, like this would clearly be a violation of this person's most sacred religious beliefs. And in the absence of that, I think we have to prioritize anti-discrimination in that, because people still have agency, and religious people and secular people, as you said, who are operating in the world, we have choices. So we can choose to go, to another employer. We can choose, right? I mean, I'm not trying to simplify it. I think it is, but I do think it's a big loophole if we want to side on the side of religious freedom being prioritized over anti-discrimination, because then people can, where do we draw the boundaries? The boundaries are not clear. One is something, a truly held religious belief, or this is an interpretation that you've just been taught your entire life, and it might not, its religious grounding might be kind of flimsy. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it
Okay.
absolutely does. It
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said.
And going to the guidebook, thank you again, May and
LJ.
LJ, and yes, I wrote down. Thank you again. One of the things that I loved in the guidebook was this kind of like four-part chart. And I would challenge all of us in the room to disassociate the word secular from not being religious, because I know lots of people who are religious, but when it comes to the public policy, they're very secular. It's like their religious views guide their personal piece, but they believe in a secular society in the public space and government policy in that area. So I think you definitely have both. And I loved what you talked about with the diversity within religion, because we use that word also so just casually, but like even in Christianity, you have millions and millions of Christians in the US who perform same-sex marriages every day, and then you have millions of Christians that are part of a denomination that don't. And then you have my mom, who was a Catholic, who was for same-sex marriage, So at the end of the day, religion spins down, just like non-religious belief, whether philosophy, to one's personal set of values, right? I mean, you get two Methodists next to each other, two Catholics, two Muslims, and they might both identify in that way, but they're going to disagree on different things. And so, this is where I come back to that idea of exemptions can be a slippery slope, because what it really turns into, and we hear this phrasing around how to craft public policy, is, well, you don't have to do it, not because of your religion or your denomination, because of your sincerely held personal beliefs. Because everybody's religion ends up coming down to a set of personal beliefs that they may share a lot with other people in their church or mosque or synagogue or temple, or a little bit, but they're coming together in that community. And so I think the idea of non-discrimination and protecting people from being harmed, becomes sort of the guiding factor of how we allow people to have the beliefs they want and practice those beliefs, especially in their personal life, to bring that to their conversations in the public square. But then when we say, if we're making a rule for all, from the most conservative Orthodox Jewish person to the most, liberal Buddhist person that you've ever met, how can we craft that law as much as we can to do as little to no harm to people as possible? And that becomes really the equal protection. That is the equal protection of people's rights.
That's where I would disagree. Okay, and
Sure.
no, but your point, I mean, the point being that, I was one of the few people who actually testified against the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Because I said, look, what it's doing is it's getting you into this mire of like, are you sincere enough? Or are your views mainstream enough? And when I said the Supreme Court turned itself into a pretzel, is the reason they defined religion as being the sincerely held religious belief is they were trying to avoid preferences. Okay, so you have the Establishment Clause running head on into the, free exercise clause. And my view is that no, what we need to talk about is protection. Are your views as protected as mine? And so if you look at a case like Masterpiece Cake Shop, or you look at a case like 303 Creative, it should come out the same way if you're dealing with it religion or you're dealing with it with speech. Can I force you to make a movie that you don't want to make? I mean, if I would win on a free speech argument, I shouldn't lose on the religion argument. So to my mind, the non-discrimination piece is not the same as the protection piece.
I just want to say, I agree and disagree at the same time, because I think within this question of like, what do you prioritize? But I do think exemptions to rules are important. I think of a case with Muhammad Ali, which we studied in my class. And, when he was basically stripped of his boxing title, about to spend time in jail for not fighting in the Vietnam War. I mean, as far as he was concerned, he was, when you say do no harm, right? He was being asked to go kill people, right? Basically, I mean, I'm sorry, like for those who participated in the Vietnam War, right? But and he was a conscientious objector, and the Supreme Court was about to rule against him until one of the justices read Malcolm X's autobiography and decided that no, it actually is a sincerely held belief, his anti-war stance, and we know he did not end up being sentenced because of this. And I think of people like that. I do think when we say that there's a rule that's going to be applied to all and there should be no exemptions, I think of people like Muhammad Ali, who would have spent time in jail because his sincerely held beliefs told him you cannot go fight a people who did nothing to hurt you, right? Who
Yes.
did nothing to you.
Yes.
And,
yes.
and so I just have a
But I would add to that it didn't have to be based on religion. It
Mhm.
could, like his was, but anybody who had a sincerely held religious or had a belief system that said that killing was wrong
Mhm.
should have had access to apply to conscientious objector status. Like that would be the fix that I would say, so that it's accessible to everyone and it wouldn't just be provided to one religion, one philosophy, one whatever, and exclude others. Because I think that's a great example.
One of the things that came out in that particular case is that the Nation of Islam was being discriminated against.
Absolutely.
You know, what constitutes a legitimate religion? And conscientious objectors from other faiths, even those that are in the minority, would be allowed as long as the Supreme Court felt that it's a legitimate religion. And so they had to conclude eventually that the Nation of Islam just as legitimate as another religion.
Mhm.
So that is a very interesting case. I think also I have a desire to have affirmative action, let's just say. And you know, affirmative action would benefit certain classes of people, certain groups. But at the same time, it would hurt other groups. So is there an allowance for correcting what has been historically wrong? To be able to balance it, even at the expense. I mean, we talk about justice, fairness is one of the constituents of justice. Is it fair to do this? And I would say yes, because of my religious convictions. And pardon me if I just go ahead and do it. The strong should be willing to do things for the weak. That's not the way it's written in the scripture, but much is required of the strong. And to be able to bear some undue pressures to right what's been wrong should be allowed for.
Yeah, but it's always that the devil is in the details.
Well,
You know,
I don't,
and the
don't
reason I
wanna-
say
I
that.
don't want to say the devil.
That's true. As we lawyers would say, strike that.
Strike that.
You know, but when you look at these questions like, how do you do stuff?
Mm.
Right? I mean, the implicit assumptions, if you want to look at a whole bunch of, I could give you case examples you just can't make up sometimes, you know, but the idea of Sunday closing laws, which were originally fought by the Jewish community, you know, but they applied, you know, but the Christians were fighting over them were the Seventh-day Adventists, right? And today, when you have an even more diverse society, you say, all right, well, let's figure out, we structurally accommodate the Sunday goers, you know, and so why are we talking about accommodations for the others when we've written the accommodation into the law in the first place? That's the question. And when I ask my students in a course called Remedies, like, what do you do if something goes wrong? You know, I said, did little Miss Brown ever get to go to a desegregated school, even though she and her dad won the case? And the answer is she did when she went to high school, but not when she went to grade school. She never got, even though she won, she never got the remedy. And so they're talking about what does a remedy look like? That's a philosophical, theological question. I'm going to leave to the theologians.
I just want to say that as a faith leader, when I'm in the public square and speaking from a religious perspective, I try to use language that is inclusive and respectful and speaks to justice. And when I'm at the General Assembly in Raleigh, trying to stand up for what I believe in, and they're writing laws and policies to be put in place to govern our state and community. My question's always going to be, does it protect the most vulnerable among us?
Mhm.
Period. And they make every law counter to that right now in North Carolina, and they're the elected leaders, they get to do that. But I'm only responsible for myself in that moment. As a faith leader standing in the public square, living out my religious convictions and beliefs. And beyond that, I have to let it go, and it is a democratic process. But I think as religious people, we have an opportunity when we're about justice love to shape policy within our communities and in our country.
Yeah.
So that, I do want to circle around just a little bit to a question that I think is related to where we've all kind of been moving. This is taken from, I love injecting current events into my classes, and this is one opportunity to do that. In her inaugural sermon at Washington National Cathedral, this was what, 3 weeks ago or so, Bishop Marianne Buddy pleaded with President Trump to, quote, "have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now," end quote. Was it appropriate for a member of the clergy to directly address figures in government in that moment, in that context? Was it?
Yes, uncategorically, yes. Not only was she in her house.
Wait, is it her house or is it?
Well, you know, that's metaphorically speaking, I suppose, yeah. Even though she was in a Christian environment, yes, she should be allowed to express her opinion. Freedom of speech is a very viable thing. So yes, she should have been able to speak that. But she should also be willing to be subject to criticism for saying that, you know. So yes, we're caught up in that type of dilemma. That a religious person, and so it gets very tricky because there is this neutrality, idea of neutrality and so forth. It gets tricky in the sense that the church, as the institution, is given certain benefits of being the church, and it turns into dollars and cents. And of course, the clergy also have certain benefits, and it's kind of expected that you won't speak on certain things. And if you do, you subject your tax exemption to be taken away from you. But on the other hand, so as far as the institution of the church is concerned, we might be able to say, yes, you need to, you know, be more silent on certain issues. But as far as a person, an individual, the bishop, she has a lot more freedom. In this case, though, she was representing her church, but she was not endorsing or supporting the opposition.
Right.
So she's threading through the needle very nicely. I'm glad that we can, as clergy, be able to speak truth to power. It's important that we do so. We'll do it with our own congregations, and we will do it in a public square. It's very important that we voice our opinions because we have something to offer.
I would just add to that absolutely, I think she was in the right. And it, you know, whether we are professors, whether we are clergy members, I think a question that's been on my mind, and I heard from Professor Ta-Nehisi Coates from Howard University. He's been very outspoken in recent months, and he basically put this question out, and he said, you know, what was the point of accruing all this career capital if we're basically being told that when you see something that's morally unjust, that's morally wrong, just turn the other, you know, turn the other way and pretend you don't see it. Like, what's the point? And I think that's a question I keep asking myself. Like, what's the point of being in these spaces, of being clergy, of leading a church, of leading a mosque, of leading a synagogue, if at the times it matters most, we stay silent?
Yeah.
Well, you know, if I can add too, a long time ago, a very senior Catholic bishop at a big conference, he says, well, you know, he'd listened to kind of, here's where the public policy is going. And he said, I don't know. He says, this is really depressing. should we hire lawyers or should we hire lobbyists? I said, you should do neither. You should stand up in your pulpit and yell at people. If you cannot be told you're going to go to hell in church, where can you be told? I mean, and the whole point of, if you really believe it, you should say it. I don't have to like it. I don't have to agree with you. That's part of that equal protection piece. You know, but for heaven's sake, in a church, if that's what she thinks, that's what she should say. Now, she has to be careful that she's not being too offensive, or that she's not representing wrongly the teachings of the church.
She-
You know, but that's a question that I can't
She
answer.
stood clearly in the lineage of her faith of the prophets. And so she had every right to do that. But I want to raise the issue if a man had stood in that pulpit and said the same thing, because now, have you read the letter the Pope wrote?
Yeah.
The Pope laid them out more than Reverend Buddy did. And will we see the outrage and the whole social media campaign against the Pope that
Yes.
we're seeing against Buddy? I haven't seen it yet.
I have.
I haven't. It just came out.
Yeah.
His letter, he just wrote a letter that just,
So it's important as to who the speaker is. Yeah,
this
that's
is this
always-
protection, equal
That's always,
protection.
that's always been played out,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
Who owns the public space,
Yep,
exactly.
you know, and the message that's acceptable in the public space.
that's right.
And so she, of course, historically and
She stepped out. of her place.
contemporarily, yeah, she had no business. How dare her?
Well, yeah, the identity of the speaker, right? You know, if this was a white man, then the criticism would have been very different. You know, it was a woman, the criticism went a different way. If it was a
Straight white.
person of color, would have gone another way. If it was a queer person, I saw a lot of comments online under it. Some person was posting, I don't see a bishop, there's no man there.
Exactly.
You know, because, and so, and one of the things that I was thinking about this beautiful sermon that she gave is like, I close my eyes and I think, if that was a non-religious person, would we have had any issue? And the answer is no, because you have the right to say whatever you want. And that type of conversation, if it inspires you to call for mercy from your religious faith, do it. If you're inspired to call for mercy because your human faith, as just being raised a certain way, says that that's what you should ask for, then you should do it. There's nothing wrong of what inspires you to call for the things that you call for. I mean, you know, the number of things we've accomplished, beautiful, wonderful things as civil rights and other things led by religious movements is tremendous. The question is that then when we look at how do we take all of those voices and apply policy to it, are we doing no or the least harm? Are we protecting people who have historically been underrepresented or, you know, underprotected, the most vulnerable? And that's where the question leans. And that to me is something, as somebody whose organization has church-state separation, so I love this conversation, is a lot of times people think that, oh, you're telling me I can't have faith. Like I can't live my life or have morals based on the teachings of, you know, my religion. And that's not it at all. You know, if you're a good person, I think most people in America would say, I'm glad you're a good person. I don't really care, you know, where it comes from. Like that's a great neighbor. Now, when we come together and say, okay, let's make a law that we can all live under, then let's talk and be like, you know, oh, okay, well, we should all have Sunday off. And then we say, well, actually, Sunday is not the best day for all of us. So let's talk about it. You know, that's the conversation where we want to be more inclusive and bring our inclusive selves to the conversation and pass laws and policy where, you know, the majority of us can live together.
Yeah, and I wonder if one of the reasons in America we're having such a hard time with the role of religion in the public square and in public and governing policies is we have lost our ability to have civil discourse.
Yes.
Lost it.
Yes.
In this country, we have lost it. And until we can get that back, we have to
I
defer
think-
to the
I
Constitution.
think we have to add another part to that. Yes, we've lost our ability to be civil. But in addition, we start out on a self-interest
That's right.
Mhm.
journey. you know,
That's right.
what's in my best interest? What do I want? And therefore, when my self-interest becomes the filter by which I hear things, I don't hear you at all.
Yeah, and there's also the factor of there's kind of this implicit understanding about control of the public space. You know, and if you look in the big line of Supreme Court cases where they're looking at public spaces versus more limited public spaces, classrooms, a lot of the big separation of church and state cases came out of classrooms. You know, and the Supreme Court's got a couple of those coming up. And so the question of the control of the environment means control of the message. And so when you say, well, you shouldn't be able to talk in public square, you know, then that I mean, that's the point about the bishop.
Yeah.
She can say what she wants to, that's her space, but she can also say what she wants to if she's invited to, you know, a White House social. She might get thrown out because she, you know, but nonetheless, you know, she has a right to speak.
I just want to add one quick thing to the conversation. I know we're trying to wrap up, but I think as we witness the rise of religious nationalism, we also need to be careful about not having historical amnesia and to understand why the founding fathers made the Establishment Clause, why it was so important and to remember the history of our country and the history of a lot of the European immigrants who did not enjoy religious freedom. And, you know, so, I mean, I for those of you who've, you know, visited southern Spain, right? I mean, that's any of Western European countries, there is a history of active religious persecution. I mean, Thomas Jefferson talks about this in his notes, you know, the fact that if you had denied the Trinity, you could be burnt, you could be, you know, hung, and people were, in fact, in Protestant England, right, at certain points of their history. So this Establishment Clause and the separation of religion and state was born of a particular history. And if we are not aware of it, we can easily devolve into something we will later regret.
The first country with whose founding document does not mention the word God once, but instead entrusts power to come from the people and not from an exterior being. Absolutely right.
I think, is that a good place for us to wrap up, Graham? Yeah? Okay, that was very well planned.
Okay, so I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know it's getting late and I wanted to make sure we respect all of your time. I just have before people leave, I have a few sort of wrap up comments and notes. First, I hope that you have had some rewarding and engaging conversations. Have this been good? Yeah? Yeah. So, four last things. So first, I want to point you to the post-event survey on your tables and in your chat. So it's the other side, the blue side that says post-event survey. If you can scan that QR code and take that survey, that would be fantastic. And again, if you complete it, you will be eligible. You can put your email in and you'll be eligible for a lottery for a $50 gift certificate, which would be cool. Yeah. And then I want to note, you know, this is really important, this work, this deliberative citizenship that you're doing here tonight. Talk is really foundational to democracy, to a pluralistic society. But it's also not enough. It's not sufficient, right? It's not all of what citizenship is. There are other things we need to be doing. We need to be going out and acting. We need to be going out and learning more and engaging in action. It could be volunteering or political activity. And so what we try to do after all of our forums and D teams is we distribute something called a pathways guide to supplement the deliberative guide that provides a range of different options, opportunities for you to do those things, organizations you might connect with across the political spectrum. And I encourage you to check those out and build on the great work and great deliberations you've been doing here tonight. The second thing I want to sort of mention is if you enjoyed tonight's conversation, we do this a lot and we're doing more of it this semester than ever before. We've got actually five, I can't believe it, five deliberative forums this semester. We're going to do one on the legacies of World War II in the Asia Pacific region. We're going to do one on the Red Line, Davidson Station, in collaboration with the town of Davidson. They've already been doing these in Davidson, but we're going to do one right here in campus, especially for students. So where's Garrett? Is Garrett still here? Garrett, you want to stand up? Garrett and Zach are two fellows who are organizing this forum, and it is going to be on February 26th, 7 o'clock in the Sprinkle Room. So, and there, I didn't know this. This is a new thing. We're going to have donuts there. So, and so come out for that. It's a great opportunity to learn about the Red Line and think about what kind of station, Red Line station, you want to have, you want to see in our town. So that's the second. Thanks. So thanks, Garrett, for organizing that. It's going to be a great conversation. We're going to be doing, where's LJ? LJ's in the back there. LJ is organizing with Isabella. Yeah, Isabella and Kevin, who's online, I think, organizing a forum on academic integrity in collaboration with the SGA and the Honor Council. So watch out for that. And then we're doing a, where's TBC? TBC is organizing with the history department a conversation on historical narrative and who gets to tell the stories of history, right? And history professors and history students and majors and anyone is welcome to join that forum that he's organizing. So we've got a lot going on. If you want to stay updated, go to our website, deliberativecitizenship.org, and go to the bottom of the page. You type your email in and you'll get updates from us. And then finally, I want to just I have several thank yous to make. So the first is, of course, to thank our panel tonight, again, for a great conversation. It's the first panel, those of you who are sort of longstanding DCI attendees, our first panel with 5 panelists. And frankly, Jason and me and Dan Lehman and our other co-conveners, we see May and LJ in the back there, Stephen too. We were worried, is 5 too many, right? Is it going to be hard to have a robust conversation in just, 55 minutes? But, they didn't get to every question, every topic, but I feel like it was a really engaging and fantastic discussion that laid the groundwork for the conversations that you just had. And so the second group I want to thank is our facilitators. So can we give a round of applause for our facilitators? And then finally, I want to thank all of you for being here. It's what, 9:07, on a whatever night. and this is something. You are here in the room, right? You are doing the work of democracy. You're doing the work of deliberative citizenship. And it's really important, it's not despite, but especially because of the political divisions that we have in our society today. And so I want to thank you all, and please give yourselves finally one last round of applause for being here. We will hang out a little bit. If people have questions, you can say hi to the panelists. But for now, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone here, and thank you to everyone online.